So we will record this meeting. So if folks can't show up, we'll throw it up on YouTube and blast it out to our network so other people can join in. But for those that are here, make sure that you're writing your questions down, throwing them into the chat throughout the conversation, and I'll try to coordinate how we engage those responses. But back to coffee talk with Sally.
It's what?
I'm trying to name the talk show Coffee Talk with Sally Bingham.
Oh.
Coffee talk.
No. Don't call it that. Call it expertise from Mary Nichols on the future of California's air and water.
Well, that's a great idea. If everyone could throw in the chat your name, your faith community, if you know the indigenous land that you're on or the city that you're in, that'd be a fun way to get to know, see where we're all from here.
Protecting California's climate standards from the Trump administration. You think we can? That's the question.
He doesn't recognize it.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in just a minute or two. Please mute yourselves, and we'd love it if you would introduce yourself in the chat.
Put that there. I'm never sure whether, the fan, you don't want computers to get too hot. So I try not to put them on cloth, but. This is the chat, people coming on.
I think, Natalie, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Let me turn it off.
Thank you. Don't turn it off, but just mute. Thank you. Got a lot of people joining. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Becca Estrada. I'm the Southern California Director here with California Interfaith Power and Light. And we thank you so much for joining this important conversation with our special guest, Mary Nichols. So if you wouldn't mind making sure that you are on mute while we begin. And as people have been doing, please continue to introduce yourself in the chat, share where you're coming from, your pronouns, which congregation you belong to. Yeah, thank you for being with us today. So with that, I will pass things along to Susan, so we will officially begin.
All right, thanks, Becca. Thanks everybody for being here for our Lunch and Learn. I'm Susan Stevenson, Executive Director with California Interfaith Power and Light. And we are based in Oakland, the unceded ancestral home of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. As we mentioned before, please feel free to share in the chat the name of the land that you are on, where you reside, as well as we'd love to know what faith community, if you're with a faith community or organization, please add that. I hope everybody is staying well and sane. These are challenging times. In addition to the tragic Los Angeles wildfires earlier this year, we've witnessed a new Trump administration, Trump 2, coming in determined to cancel, gut, repeal, roll back our hard-won clean air and climate protections. California is in the crosshairs because of our nation-leading clean air standards, which are promulgated by the California Air Resources Board, one of the most influential and effective environmental agencies in the world, not just the state. Also because other states can choose to follow California's standards instead of the federal government, as 17 states have done, 17 and counting, I think, in the case of our clean car standards, which are so critical. So we are really excited and grateful today to be able to have this conversation with a real champion, someone who has been called the most effective environmental regulator in the world, Mary Nichols. Because this is a lunch meeting, I know some of you might be having your lunch, so let's quickly have a blessing. Stevens, our Northern California director, has a blessing to offer us, and then after that, the Reverend Sally Bingham will introduce our guest speaker today. After that, we'll have plenty of time for discussion and wrap up at 12:45. Are you ready, Gregory?
Yes, please join me in a spirit of reflection. Source of life, sacred mystery, we gather as one people with many traditions to bless the sacred earth in word and in deed. Fire of transformation, light of truth, ignite in us the courage to defend our sacred earth, to protect the most vulnerable, to challenge the powerful, to rekindle hope where despair has taken root. Sacred waters, womb of life, may justice flow like a mighty river, washing away greed and indifference, nourishing the roots of love and renewal. Ground of being, firm and enduring, keep us steady in the struggle, patient in our efforts, and unwavering in our love for this world. May our prayers not only be words, but actions that restore ecological balance, compassion that heals the climate wounds, and faith that moves mountains. In the spirit of all of our faiths, and in reverence for the interconnected web of all being, we bless this work for climate justice, for the generations yet to come, for the beauty of this precious planet, and for the love that must not fail. So may it be. Amen. Ashe, Om Shanti, and blessed be. Sally?
Okay, Susan, are you going to say anything more, or shall I just introduce Mary?
Oh, go ahead, Sally. Thank you. By the way, let me just quick housekeeping in case anybody doesn't know this already. If you want to view the speaker, if you want the person speaking to be their picture to be bigger, go under view. And if you have it on gallery view, you could put it on speaker view.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you for that. I was just looking for where to find you. Everyone who's on, I'm grateful for your being here. And I know you hear this a lot when people introduce other people. But I really mean that this is an honor for me to introduce Mary Nichols, who, in my estimation, is famous. And you'll hear more about that. She's not going to tell you she's famous because she's modest, but she is famous, and she's done amazing work for not only for California, because California standards get sent all around the world. And I met Mary years and years ago. We were both trustees at Environmental Defense Fund, and we were talking a minute ago. I think that was about 35 years ago. And over the years, we've gotten together on different events, and we're trying again in the future to have some lunch together with a mutual friend where we can do some more personal gossipy catch up than business wise. But Mary is an attorney. And when we were at EDF, I was just a normal person, and she was a normal person, but she had great talent and was invited to run the California Air Resources Board under Jerry Brown first, I believe. And you, Mary, when you come on, you can correct me, but you've served under 3 governors, Schwarzenegger, Brown, and Newsom. And you ran the Air Resources Board. What we're coming up against now is an administration that would like to take California's waivers away. California had the ability to set its own standards for air quality, and you were instrumental in holding on to that the last time Trump was president. Now you're probably going to have to face it again, or California will have to face it again. And maybe you could give us some insight into how we kept California's waivers intact the last time Trump was in our lives. And I think that people will be really interested in that. And what can he destroy California, which I think he wants to. So I'm going to turn it over to you, because I think that what you have to say and the questions that come in are far more important than me blabbing away about about us. So
Okay, thanks, Sally. Thank you for that lovely introduction and for not reading my entire biography, because I've been doing this work for a very long time, as you know. So, and I see some of my fellow Los Angeles Episcopalians who are part of the Bishop of Los Angeles's Climate Change Commission. So I want to have a special shout out to them. Thank you for coming. I want to start by saying that what we're experiencing now is actually unprecedented. So I will go back and answer your question about what we did the last time Trump was president and how we did it. But I have to make it clear that we are in a whole different universe when it comes to his ability and his hubris, frankly, his complete lack of respect for any of the norms or even the rule of law. And so I don't want to think that because we were successful in defending our standards once before, and frankly, driving out his first EPA appointee, who was a disaster. Most people have already forgotten about that whole era. But it's different now because we're experiencing what really amounts to a coup d'etat that's going on with, in many cases, unqualified, and in any case, completely cowardly people who have decided to sign on to Trump as though he were a completely authoritarian king, monarch, whose every whim should be translated into action, regardless of whether that action actually has any support in the law. What that leads us into is a situation where the other two branches of government are going to have to step up. We know that the congressional branch, the legislative branch, is in a weakened position at the moment because many of the people who are now among the majority are there because of their pledge of loyalty to Trump, and they're afraid that if they resist him in any way, they too will be taken out. And that leaves us with the courts, despite the fact that the courts were subject to a lot of attention by Trump when he was president before, and some of his appointees are in very key positions in the court system and on the Supreme Court. One of the things that the Biden administration did very well was to pay attention to the vacancies that were whenever they cropped up in the federal court system. So the situation is actually quite a lot better than it might have been in terms of having people, both appointees of other presidents from the past, including Reagan appointees and Bush appointees, who are willing to just go along with whatever weird theory is presented to them, and also, relatively newer appointees. And so the courts are where this is all going to be fought out. In the case of the Clean Air Act and climate change, and I have to acknowledge that while this is where I've spent most of my life and career, as a human being and as a citizen of California and the United States, there are other things that are happening on a daily basis that are in many ways more horrifying even than the fires. People being plucked off of the streets or taken from the fields or from school if they're children, and being put on airplanes or buses and shipped off to prisons in other places is way beyond what we're experiencing in terms of immediate life-threatening situations. But having said that, climate is a life-threatening disaster, and we know from the fires that we have just succeeded in putting out for the moment in LA that climate change is already causing immediate and very visible threats to people and property. And there doesn't really appear to be any serious question among even the politicians about whether climate change is a cause or a multiplier in some way or another responsible for the extent and the amount of destructiveness that these fires had. And or no one is denying that they will happen again here in California and elsewhere. So I feel like it's important to sort of start from that backdrop when I say that when we were challenged the first time around, and it wasn't even really an explicit threat in the beginning, but only something that we were anticipating. The California Air Resources Board, which I was at that point the chair of, was able to swing into action to collaborate with a whole variety of other friends, including nonprofit organizations, and the what then I think was still called the Episcopal Power and Light before it became Interfaith Power and Light. I'm not sure if it was had already made the big leap to being a much bigger organization, but there were a whole range of different organizations that came forward to work with us and collaborate to make sure that basically whenever the administration threatened or did something, even if it was seemingly a more minor procedural attempt to undercut what we were doing in California, that we were prepared to fight back in court, and we were ready to go into court with excellent
Well, I'm watching a
lawyers.
very good webinar. If you'd like to join me.
Sorry, I guess somebody needs to be muted, maybe. Anyway, I think we were we ourselves as California, represented by our governor and our attorney general, were ready to litigate, and we were on solid ground and had quite a bit of political support as well, because our authority is grounded in the Federal Clean Air Act, which has an explicit exemption for California to set standards that are more stringent for motor vehicles. No other state has the power to set its own standards, but other states over the years have gained the power to adopt California's standards, so that we are not standing alone at this moment, but we actually have at the moment 14 states that have signed on to use California's standards. Not all of them, but most of them have also adopted our, as one of the standards, the mandate for auto companies to sell zero emission vehicles, which primarily means battery powered electric vehicles in their states. And so over time, and especially increasing in the last 4 years, the auto industry itself has really come on board with a recognition that its future, not only in the US, but globally, is electric, that other parts of the world are going to demand zero emission electric, or in some cases, fuel cell vehicles, because either they don't have petroleum of their own, or it's very expensive, or they are already anticipating or experiencing severe air quality problems in their major cities, which of course includes China, Indonesia, India, where it's become clear that vehicles are the principal sources of the horrendous health harming pollution that they face, and also are the growing in some places already more than half, which is what they are here, of the sources of greenhouse gas emissions contributing to climate change. So the spread of some of the worst aspects of what we did in the US is now worldwide, and the companies that make these vehicles have been gradually, by force, in some cases by legal force, required to get more serious about producing electric vehicles that people want to buy. And so instead of having a choice of only the vehicles that Elon Musk was producing, we have all major manufacturers are making electric vehicles, a couple that are only making electric vehicles, and they are covering a wide range of sizes and shapes and configurations so that people can actually find something that they want to buy. They're still too expensive for most people, and the car market in general is not in great shape at the moment, but percentage-wise, the numbers of electric vehicles, the sales of electric vehicles are growing, and the incentives by the Biden administration to roll out electric charging using both public and private funds has also made it much more possible for people to have them. So that's what we've done. That's what California has been at the forefront of. That's what we created. And when they try to reverse those gains that we've made, and particularly when Trump and his friends in the oil industry talk about how they're going to restore choice and build more build new refineries and open up lands for more development, etc. Even they know that their future is much more about export and making the petroleum into plastics than it is to expanding the market for gasoline and diesel fuel, because it's recognized the harm that these fuels cause. So we will litigate. We'll use the Clean Air Act. We will go to court. We won't try to bring every case that could possibly get us into trouble with the Supreme Court, but we'll carefully be working with attorneys general from California and other states, and with others in the private sector to hold on to what we've got. We'll also be looking for new and hopefully maybe a little bit more surprising ways of partnering with cities, with mayors, with non-blue states, that is Republican dominated states, more conservative states, where they may be resisting the mandates, but they will be interested in other ways in which they can participate in the new the new economy of electric vehicles. I'm going to stop that sort of opening comment, and because I know there are people who are already putting questions in the chat, and maybe we can get there faster.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that overview, and thank you for all that you've done. You have been such a hero over the years, and getting California really in the lead on climate action and making progress to reduce our emissions. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, just because I saw, I was reading in the automotive news, which I don't normally read, but I read because you were one of the 100 women leading change. And in that article, they asked you what you were most proud of. And one of the things you said was you were most proud of learning how to negotiate and come together around certain visions, especially around zero emissions vehicles. And you certainly did that even under like incredible pressure last time when Trump was in office, bringing the auto industry and the federal government and the state government together around moving forward with zero emissions vehicles. And I wonder if you could say more about that and whether you think that vision will be able to prevail during this next.
Sure. I mean, I think the example that we were able to set of being able to bring the auto companies around to a position where they voluntarily supported California's stricter standards in the face of the Trump administration's rollbacks is an example of how you can start off, and sometimes you have to start off, in an adversarial mode in order to get people to come to the table. But then when they are at the table, you can find ways to give them reason to want to work with you other than just fear or intimidation, and actually find ways to do things that are beneficial to everybody. I am a believer in the concept of sustainability, as well as doing the work that we do to protect public health against assaults from pollution. In doing that, we're seeking a state of being in harmony with the natural world, and in order to do that, we have to have all sectors of society, or at least most of them, contributing to that and coming along with that as their overarching goal, even if we may differ about the pace or the timing of action. And so, as a government official, I had the great opportunity and backing of the governor who appointed me, legislators in California, and many businesses, in addition to the auto companies themselves, in saying, yeah, this is what we want to see happen. So that's how you have to do things in a democratic society if you're trying to operate in a way that will achieve majority support, at least, for what it is you're trying to do. And of course, that is not what the Trump administration is trying to do. I have to say, they have no basis for thinking that most people want to get rid of electric cars, or only have petroleum burning vehicles available. It's just, we know that's not true, but they don't appear to be honoring the will of the majority. They have their own idea of what they want to do, and they want to move very quickly to overturn any resistance. And that's why it's a different situation right now.
Susan, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. This is Susan again. By the way, if people want to, just a reminder, if you want to be able to see the speaker bigger than everybody else in the gallery, go to the top tab of the Zoom and choose speaker view. But I was just going to pull from one of the questions in the chat about where do we stand right now in terms of, I think the ARB has had several of its waivers approved by the EPA just during the last weeks of the Biden administration. Now, those waivers, since we have those waivers from the EPA, that means we can move forward with the stronger vehicle standards. But are they vulnerable because they were just approved so late?
So at the time of the election, we had 7 waivers that were pending. And by the end of the Biden administration, we had 3 that were left that hadn't been acted on. And the state withdrew all of them so that the incoming administration wouldn't have the opportunity to act on them. The reason for that was not that they were, any less committed to those particular programs. A couple of them are really very important. They were a little bit more legally vulnerable based on our own analysis. I say our as if I were still at CARB, because I probably always will be in spirit anyway. But California's some of California's waiver requests were a little bit bolder or required a little bit more, let's say, enthusiasm on the part of EPA for working with California to get the waivers passed, they were withdrawn immediately because if the Trump people had their chance to pull them over to Congress under a provision that was passed back in the Newt Gingrich era called the Congressional Review Act. Congress could have disapproved of those regulations on its own, could have blocked them, and then under that legal authority that Congress gave itself, the agency or any new administration would not be able to come in and adopt regulations in that particular subject area, even if they could fix whatever the legal threat was, a legal vulnerability that Congress had identified, or just a new administration comes along, or a new Congress comes along, after the midterm elections, they would still have been unable to act on those waivers. So those were pulled back, but California received waivers, including for its light duty emission standards that include the zero emission vehicle mandates. And those are in effect. Now, as a practical matter, although legally speaking, California cannot enforce its regulations without a waiver from EPA. Historically, the auto companies don't wait around for the waiver to be granted. They will protest in many cases or try to get the waiver to be modified in some way, get the regulations to be modified, but they will also comply. And that's based on generally corporate behavior of not wanting to get caught violating a regulation, but also recognizing that in the likely event that the regulation does get approved, they would be behind the 8 ball when it came to compliance. So they go ahead and basically try to comply, begin the process at least of complying anyhow, which just means, meeting a tighter emission standard. So that's where we are at the moment. We know that the new EPA is going to try to go back and challenge the previous waivers that were granted, and we're prepared to fight back against that effort. And so far, even though the car industry, the auto manufacturers are in some cases saying that they're having problems complying with some of the California standards, particularly the mandate to sell a certain volume of electric vehicles. They're doing fine in California, but they're having problems with some of the other states that adopted California standards. New York, for example, has never been able to meet the targets that they had set. And that seems to be mostly because they have not adopted any of the same kinds of policies that California adopted to try to make sure that there's enough charging out there for people to get and use electric vehicles. So that's all still in flux. But as far as California is concerned, we're reasonably comfortable, let's just say that way, not overly confident, but reasonably confident that we'll be able to resist the rollbacks.
Okay, thank you. And that brings up other policy, complementary policy, and Dahlia from Danu is here. Thank you for your question, Dahlia. You were asking about the courts. Is this primarily in the, going to be fought out in the courts, or are there other policies, are there ways the legislature can support, or are there ways people we can be active?
Sure. So one of the things that I sort of alluded to quickly, but then didn't really speak about, was ideas about other ways to promote the same objectives, but that don't just rely on the Clean Air Act or on any kind of federal support. So the California legislature is looking at a couple of ideas ranging from making up for the incentives that will be cut in all likelihood for purchase of electric vehicles, to finding a way to incorporate something called fee baits, where you have a fee for registering a new vehicle, which gets rebated if it's a clean air vehicle, to looking at land use policies, which mostly would have to be implemented at the local level, but which clearly require the provision of charging capacity, for example, for electric vehicles in new homes. So, you know, there's a bunch of ideas like that that are kind of being vetted in the legislative context right now, and it's definitely possible to be able to get involved in those efforts here through your local representatives. And I think that it's not so much a question of giving up on the Clean Air Act, but looking for creative new ways to involve more levels of government, and frankly having other policy objectives that are incorporated, so that we're getting, you know, multiple benefits out of whatever it is we're doing to try to change our transportation system as a whole.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning the importance of charging, EV charging stations. I know that was a question in the chat too. Just a little commercial for CIPL. We are helping, and we'd love to help your congregation get EV charging stations installed. If you are interested in that, please contact me or one of the other CIPL staff. And then on the issue of local support, how other ways California support can support, what about the local AQMDs, like the air quality management districts? Aren't there some rebates and support for EVs that can come through there?
Yes, there's a couple of different programs that the state has implemented where money flows through the local air districts, including programs that are designed to try to get lower income people to turn in older, you know, really polluting vehicles and be able to get into not necessarily a brand new vehicle, but even a used electric vehicle, because there's now a real market for those out there, from, you know, people who are the early adopters who get a new vehicle every couple of years and then have one that they're turning in. So there's a lot of that kind of activity going on at the local level, but the problem is that those rely on state money, which has primarily come out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is well, it is a tax, in fact, and it has a 2/3 vote of the legislature to require major industrial polluters like power plants, like oil refineries, like glass plants, etc., to purchase allowances to cover their greenhouse gas emissions. Most of those are privately held, but the state owns a portion of those allowances, a little around 10%, and the income from those allowances, when they are sold, goes into this fund, which then in turn has been used for things like the rebates or special incentives for people to buy electric cars. And that program needs to be reauthorized this year. So reauthorizing, meaning it's going to run out of money. So in addition to the financial strains that the state is already under, which are now compounded by the fires and have been, you know, hit by inflation, they're going to have to get that program reauthorized, or the money won't be there to do what is already authorized, but just has to be funded.
Thank you. Gregory, I think, was corralling some of the questions. Is there anything that stands out from the chat, Gregory, that people want to know?
No, I think that you've hit on most of them.
Great. One of the things I wanted to ask about, Mary, is what about those really important ARB proposed regulations, like the one that would have phased out dirty diesel trucks and trains? I think those were pulled already by the ARB because of the resistance from maybe even the Biden administration, but at least the Trump administration wasn't going to approve those. Where do those stand, and is there hope for those to go into effect later?
So the truck and bus regulations, the mandate on the manufacturers to build more of those vehicles stands. What was taken away was the mandate for fleet purchasers to buy those vehicles. So when I was still at the Air Resources Board, when we came up with that program, and the concept was that it would be a two-part program. At the time, I tried mightily to get the two parts to be done at the same time. And because of sheer personnel overload, frankly, we were not able to do that. So we started with the mandate to the engine manufacturers to build clean engines, build electric trucks. And then the next phase was the purchase mandate. That one was resisted ferociously by the industry, by the trucking industry primarily. And that is what is now pulled back to California. And that's one of the things that I know the state is looking at, whether they can come up with some alternative means to enforce those regulations. So an example of that would be, since many of the trucks that we're talking about and ones that really impact on some of our most vulnerable communities are around the ports in LA, Long Beach, Oakland, for example, where there are trucks pulling in and out all day long and all night long, carrying big containers that are going to be put on ships, etc., or coming from ships. And the ports themselves have quite a bit of authority that they could use. And they've used it in the past in a couple of cases to put a special fee on the emissions from the non-clean trucks, the dirtier diesel trucks, and use that as a way to help subsidize the truckers who want to get into a cleaner vehicle. And that type of program could start up again. It would be much better if the port would do it on its own. It may require the state to step in and find a way to require the ports to adopt those regulations, but the ports are subject to regulation by the state as well as the federal government. And so that's one of the things that I know that they're looking at. And lawyers are also looking at whether there are some other creative strategies that could be used in the areas of zoning, for example, and permitting, the local land use authorities to create clean vehicle zones where you just can't enter if you don't have a clean vehicle. I mean, these are big, difficult, politically difficult, sometimes draconian measures, but if they can be tailored in a way that makes them broadly acceptable, those are things that we should be doing.
Thank you. So looking at the ports, looking at the local AQMDs, and then maybe there's some roles for the legislature as well. Let me invite Claire. I know you've had your hand. I'm sorry, Daniel. Daniel Tam. Hi, Reverend Daniel. Also had your hand up, then it went down. But we have a few more minutes. Would you like to ask a question, Daniel? And then
Sure,
Claire.
thank you. Thanks. I'm Daniel Tam from LA. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
I was wondering, and I put this into the chat, how do you see the potential of building coalitions among larger faith organizations like CIPL, the Bishops' Commission? I know the Lutherans, there's Dianu, there's people all over the state of California with, a lot of very fervent people who are engaged with these groups. How do you see the action of all of these working in coalition together, along with elected officials, standing up to resist the Trump administration's assault on what is basically none of their business? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think coalitions are necessary. People who, are able to work at their local parish level may not be in a position to, travel to Sacramento or attend a lot of extra meetings. And I think all of us need to try to support some organizing being done to help build those coalitions. I don't think it takes a huge amount. I also think that those foundations, there are certainly many of them, and I know they're stressed, but the ones that specially focus on air and health related issues, generally speaking, don't think of churches and synagogues as being the places that they are going to give their funding to for this purpose. But I think a lot of them are beginning to change their mind when they see how easily they can, how easily an election can lead to a situation where the major national groups that have been the ones that have gotten the most larger share really in the past of the funds can just be pushed aside, and a lot of that is because the perception that we don't have grassroots support, because we haven't built the kind of communications mechanisms that frankly the right wing and right wing religious groups did, the anti-abortion groups, the other sort of Christian nationalist groups, those folks over the years had real funding from wealthy individuals and corporate entities to develop their own communications mechanisms. And they have all these mechanisms. I don't even know what the word is exactly, but certainly podcasts and, hosts and all that who are spouting their views constantly. For some sin I must have committed that I didn't know about, found myself on a couple of mailing lists from right-wing groups that are in my inbox every single day, asking for money to protect President Trump and his agenda. And you can see that they've got support from other places to do all of this. And, we're not able to do that. So we've got to find ways to work together and to build the capacity. And I know we have people, certainly people who are, younger than I am, who are much more adept at using the tools that are available to them, through the internet, through all the various podcasting, et cetera, that they can do. And so I'm totally committed to the idea that that's what we need to be building, even though I'll probably be in the background, just, sending in my donation.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, that's all important too. Claire, you've had your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. And thank you so much to Mary for your leadership. I'm a longtime fan of what the ARB has managed to accomplish,
Thank you.
working through the bureaucracy,
Yes.
but with a vision of what you're trying to do. So my question is, your modeling for how California can achieve their greenhouse gas emissions goals is incredibly important for driving implementation forward. What are your thoughts about how the approach to modeling can better incorporate a range of I would say, science-based but competing models, such as forestry wildfire emissions and dairy manure biogas?
Wow. I mean, that's a good question. It is a little bit of a technical question, but modeling in general is, built to support a particular issue or to look at a particular item and doesn't incorporate all the other issues that perhaps we should be looking at. We don't have a full model of all the policies that contribute to global warming because it's too complicated for any existing model to be able to crunch all those different sets of data and come up with algorithms. And there's also policy built into the modeling in terms of what's important and what doesn't seem to be so important. And that's an area where without any government support or funding, and with hostility to what's already been going on within the agencies that have been trying to improve the modeling and use models in a more holistic way, we potentially are in very, very serious trouble. I mean, right now, I just saw this morning as one of the many, new assaults on knowledge that the administration has told employees of NOAA to cease any cooperation or collaboration with any foreign nationals, whatever that term means. Well, to the extent that it means joint research projects that we've been doing with other countries, with people who reside in other countries, institutions in other countries, or with the UN agencies, for example, that stuff could all be completely just put aside for years. And that's only one example of many of the areas where we need more and better use of science to come up with decisions. So the answer, I think, is for everybody. I mean, this is really one of those situations where universities and colleges and technical institutions and companies that are looking to the future and know that these issues are not going to go away need to be finding ways to collaborate to produce better information. I just pulled up one of the questions that was in the chat. I'm sure they're all there, but while trying to talk and think, I can't always read everything at the same time. But there was one question in that I thought was a really interesting question, which I'd like to address, which is, can you reiterate your theory of why President Trump and his administration are investing so heavily in fossil fuels? It's been hard for me to understand the strategy when it's now cheaper to invest in renewable energies, particularly solar and wind. Obviously, there are environmental benefits to the energy transition, but even if somebody doesn't accept the science and is just looking at the economics, they would come to that conclusion. So let me just kind of jump on that question because it's such a great, all-encompassing kind of question. Like, why are they doing something that appears to be so irrational? And, the answer on that isn't just the amount of money that's been invested by petroleum interests, although that certainly is a factor. Even the oil industry doesn't think that they're going to be, or the coal industry, they're hoping to extend their life. They're hoping to continue to, create profits for their management for longer than would happen if we made the transition as quickly as we could. So they are certainly, trying to put pebbles under the tires and all that. But it's also, I think, a pure ideological position that comes in for reasons that aren't rational. They're not completely rational. They don't look at the economics. They don't look at where the new jobs are coming from. And the only real hope, I think, for prevailing in that situation is to present the facts to people who are still capable of looking at the facts, and then find out as best we can why it is that when they see the facts and do recognize them, they're afraid to act on them. And there, at least for the moment, as I mentioned before, we are facing a situation in what was once the Republican Party, which was conservative but rational, is now dominated by people who are not, who aren't interested. And as I see Daniel Tam pointing up here, MAGA means going back to what people's vision is of what life was like in the past, to the, you know, a world which maybe never really existed, but for sure is not attainable now, where, you know, white people ruled everything, and where, you know, oil was the only fuel, oil and coal that people used, and all of that. That's just not even possible anymore. So those of us who come from the rational side of things have a hard time in a world like that, because our arguments aren't enough to win the day. And so we have to find ways of appealing to emotions that are hopefully more positive. I do mention the case of the battle that we fought back in 2010 over a recall, a proposition that was on the ballot, lost my word there for a second, that would have repealed California's climate laws, basically. Tom Steyer and others came forward and raised enough money to run a real ad campaign that focused on the fact that it was out-of-state companies that were proposing to repeal our statute, but also that really emphasized families where people were looking at the kind of jobs and opportunities that their kids were going to have. And it was that kind of a focus on, you know, what do you want for your kids, that carried the day, even in parts of the state that are, you know, relatively much more conservative, because, you know, we knew from good polling that they had done, as well as the creativity of some of our consultants, that people, even those who are working in oil related industries, don't think that those are the jobs that their kids are going to have, or that they want their kids to have. And so being able to switch people's frame of thinking about this issue to something that was a little more focused on themselves, but on themselves in terms of what they were trying to achieve for their families, was the thing that really carried the day in terms of the political victory that we ended up winning. And it was a very decisive one.
Thank you. Yes, that's really important to remember the future that we want and remind people of the future we want. And most people are strongly in favor of a clean energy future, an inclusive economy. And that's what we want when we advocate for these really important clean air and climate regulations. I know we only have a couple more minutes, Roddy has been waiting to ask a question, and then Kevin, I think you might have had a follow-up question, but let Rodney go first.
Okay, yes, hi. Could you bring us up to date on the rules and regulations that would require all electric homes and phasing out natural gas for home use? And that's very important for LA, since they're going to be building several tens of thousands of new homes if they make them with gas or make them with electricity.
Well,
has that been stalled, or is it still moving ahead?
No, a couple things are going on at the moment in terms of the rebuilding. So the immediate reaction on the part of, I think, all the elected officials, even the ones who have supported the shift to all electric, was to say, let's just waive all regulations because they're going to get in the way of the rebuilding. And they were responding to what they heard from people who were in the immediate path of the fires, people who had lost their homes or were unable to go back to their homes because of the damage that had been done, and people were saying they just wanted to rebuild as quickly as possible. And therefore, anything that might stand in the way of doing that was going to be put on hold, indefinitely. We're already beginning to see some second thoughts emerging, including from some of the residents themselves who are saying, if we do rebuild, we're going to rebuild all electric because that's what their contractor is telling them is a better way to go. And in the long run is going to be cheaper, more efficient, healthier, et cetera. And so I think it's going to take a little bit of time before we get this all settled. And it is important for groups like CIPL to, in a compassionate way, keep on holding up the need that both the individuals who are confronting these terrible situations and the community has, the need that we have to rebuild in a way that is more sustainable. But right now, those are very hard conversations to have. And we are not in a situation where those are going to, if you were in a position to walk in, if you were somebody who was burnt out and you had your plans right there in hand and your contractor and everybody else, well, you couldn't get in right yet. But even assuming that we had a clearance from the EPA, which was under orders to do the fastest cleanup ever, meaning cut corners on the hazardous waste and what was going to happen to them. But assuming you could get past all of that, you still wouldn't necessarily have to comply with the legislation that requires people to not use natural gas hookups when they come in and build a new building. So this is it's a very important issue that you're raising, and it's one that hopefully people who are persistent and are going to be around and who can talk to others, in a way that doesn't make it sound like we're just a bunch of entitled, folks who aren't suffering along with everybody else. We can build the support for doing the right thing here, but it's not guaranteed at the moment that that's what would happen.
Thank you.
All right, we have one more minute. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mary, for the extra time. And I don't know if our Zoom is going to actually end. So let me see. Kevin, were you trying to ask a follow-up to your last question?
Sure. Thank you, Suzanne. It was a clarification, I suppose, for Mary. It sounded like you were saying it's like an ideological sort of epidemic of a desire for self-preservation or consolidation of power at like the individual or national level. Does that feel like a...
I didn't mean to say that
okay.
that way. The ideological thing I was referring to was the idea that any new and clean technology is a threat to the MAGA view of the world. That was what I think I was trying to say.
Okay. No, thank you for that.
I mean, Trump has a thing about low flush toilets. It's something he talked about a lot, and also about light bulbs, efficient light bulbs, which are bad in his view. And he's a builder, so he's an expert, and he knows that those things are bad. What? What is he even talking about? I don't know. I mean, I understand what the words mean, but why exactly?
So like a cultural identity or something.
Yeah, exactly.
More so. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm out of time.
Thanks, everyone. And let's thank Mary for her time. You can use the react button at the bottom, or you can say yay. Thank you. Really nice to see you all here today. Really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us, Mary, and hope everybody has a good rest of your day.
Thanks. Look forward to seeing you again out there.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.